My name's Stephen Phillips. I run this program called LA Metro Program in Architecture and Urban Design for Cal Poly San Luis Obispo in Los Angeles. This is our 11th year here in LA, super fun. And we're teaching fourth year undergraduates from the main campus here in LA. So just to give you an idea of their level. We have 35 students in the program. Slightly more than usual, mainly because I think a lot of the other off-campus programs had to be canceled. Not to say that we're not wonderful, but I think that something had a slight impact in a good way. Great group of students. I've run the program for a while and I teach design in the program. We have a number of faculty teaching with us. We do it as a team taught effort. So everyone's expertise is utilized as they can best provide it. Joanna Grant, hi Joanna, she has been teaching with us with design, been fantastic. Jimenez Lai also taught in the first quarter. It's a 20-week studio, 2 quarters. So it's a little bit more than your usual semester. He taught in the first quarter with us. Ismail Soto also teaching design and computational and design, and Pavel Getov, who many of you probably should know or may know, he's been teaching with us. I'm sorry, there's a question. Maybe that wasn't a question. Is that just someone unmuted? Anyway, so Pavel teaches design and practice with us. Teddy Slowick with us teaching design and practice. Teddy, thank you. Fabio Zangoli comes in for structures. And then we have Sarah Hearn and Tina Sorio teaching history theory. So it's a pretty synthetic group all working together, good synergy. And they have students also intern 2 days a week in offices. This is our morning session, 9 a.m. to 11:30. We have Corinza Harris from Morphosis and SciArc. Hopefully I got that right. Yes. Fernando Herrera should be here eventually from Morphosis offices. Daniela, I just did it wrong. Daniele Profeta, AP practice also at Yale and Syracuse teaching, and William Williams from the University of Cincinnati. And I also noticed that you were at Rice, probably visiting, I'm not sure. Fun for that to do too. We have 5 students, so we're going to move fairly reasonably today. Keith, Ruyi, Langdon, Charlie, and Kostov. Just to give you an idea of what we did this year, it's slightly different than usual, but we've been doing housing for about 5 years, high rise and mid rise. This year we took on low rise, specifically surrounding the low rise competition that was created by the city under Christopher Hawthorne. That was a competition. About 400 people entered that competition. We entered, all of our students had their own project. Also, a number of our faculty also had their own projects. And we entered 12 of our student projects. One of our students won honorable mention. We were pretty proud of that, Erica David. And also our faculty doing it on their own, Joanna Grant and Jimenez Lai also received honorable mention. Honorable mentions were pretty much projects that were thoughtful, interesting, and inventive and creative, while the winners tended to be, had a different agenda. We'll leave that at that. Related to something the city's been trying to push, which our projects are completely opposite. So we then developed these ideas of an architectural project to kind of enliven their architectural skills, mainly thinking about spaces in between, inside outside spaces, and also how those spaces might relate to a site or an environment in a very abstract manner, pretty much surrounding mostly computer solid modeling. And that's just to give them some language skills and some interests and some graphic sensibility that's all their own. We then add in a building program separately, comes in later. And this one is actually a smaller program for us. Usually we've gone up to 1.25 million actually for our high rises, but this one is a 210,000 square foot low rise project. It's a multi-income housing. It also includes a small hotel with boutique and transient housing built in. Also has social and health services available on site alongside creative office spaces and retail. There's also a substantive, half the program is provided for public landscaped open spaces and spaces in between, so courtyard type spaces, things like that nature. Pocket parks, 210,000 square feet, matching about the 210,000 square foot of the building itself. So we're looking at about a 50% porosity. Parking underground with mechanical, there's about 60,000 square feet of public commercial program, 50,000 square feet of flexible creative office space, and 100,000 square feet. So half the program is housing. Half of that program is really mid-low income affordable housing. And then it's matched with transitional family housing, high mid-income housing, and then the boutique and the transient hotel. The point is to try to create a very multi-income environment, very mixed use. And that has been cited in Echo Park, Los Angeles. Those of you familiar or unfamiliar with Echo Park, it's a very, very beautiful little neighborhood near Chavez Ravine, near downtown. It's had a very, very long history. It's actually very, very multi-cultural and multi-ethnic, but it's been struggling with gentrification for a while recently, last 15, 20 years. And also there's some challenges that have taken place with the way in which the city's been treating the homeless, which came to a head here at Echo Park Lake earlier this year. We're very close to that site. We're right here on the corner, Sunset Boulevard, Echo Park Avenue. And Sunset Boulevard is really the main public commercial area. It's been definitely heavily gentrifying over in this area up the street, and that's moving into this territory as well. We picked this larger lot, which is mostly a parking lot, but also has like a Walgreens and an organic food store. And this gives you an idea of the location, kind of an artist bohemian community as well, all kind of mixing together. And we're right in this big corner location, trying to keep ourselves within the 4-story maximum of the local neighborhood, about 45 feet high. This kind of gives you an idea of the track. Here in Sunset, here's Echo Park. There's basically a small kind of school over here, mostly residential on the backside. And then there's the commercial with a very pedestrian sort of neighborhood on the front. So with that said, basically the focus is a little bit on these spaces of the in-between, things that happen between the different programs and how you can turn those into spatial opportunities. We look also at architectural concept, form and material. We look at urban concept of site strategy. And then ultimately there's a socio-political conversation that comes up, in my opinion, surrounding organizational and programmatic concepts as well. So I'm going to stop there and we are going to turn to Keith, who's gonna begin today, running at about 20 to 25 minutes per student for the whole thing.
Hello, everyone. You see the screen? The slideshow? Okay, great, perfect. Hi, my name is Keith, and for this proposal, I am looking at the idea of starting from the ground, having a softscape in the center of the site, and having also path that cuts through the site and having multiple points of entry and access, and various ways of vertical circulation that connects to the ground. And the housing block will be near the Logan Street and weaving to the Sunset Boulevard, and on facing Montana Street is a transitional housing and hotel. And in between the housing block and the transitional housing and hotel is a clinic pharmacy that's open to the public. And there will be offices for different organizations and for the tenants and people living on the site to use. And a mix of offices and radio station on the corner of Sunset Boulevard and Logan Street that has a connection to the housing block. and having a boutique hotel facing the Sunset Boulevard provides an opportunity to connect with having a sponsorship kind of relationship with the radio station and the public radio station. And a grocery store facing Echo Park Avenue, and restaurant and coffee shops on the Sunset and Echo Park Avenue. On the ground floor, the main path cut through the site, and having the radio station is up on the corner of Sunset Boulevard, Logan Street. And there's various sections that shows the relationship between these blocks, and elevations that shows that face different four faces of the streets. And this is the concept board.
Sorry, so you're through with your presentation? Are you?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Okay, just making sure, because I was wondering for a second if you ready for us to start. I have a couple, so I get the formal operations. I even think I understand the kind of distribution of program on the site. But I guess when I first saw one of the earlier images, it looked like you had these series of kind of stairs, circulation towers, right? It's almost like lava lamp, something like this kind of series of, a field of series of stairs. And I thought it was kind of an interesting idea, but I also thought they were going to go all the way down to the garage, and that you're essentially saying, I have these series of things that actually takes you up from the parking, and each time you come up into a kind of court, sometimes at different levels. Each one can kind of have its own entry level. But it looks like they kind of start from the parking lot up. Is that correct? Or do you see them as kind of cores or anchors that go all the way down?
Yeah, the red ones that you're talking about.
This mute thing. So do those stairs go all the way down?
Yeah, the red vertical course takes you from each different programs down to the same ground level.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Oh, I see. Let's go back to the diagrams. Then that might be the case that I guess the other thing is, I think perhaps there's too many of them. I'm just not sure if they can all be special enough if you have that many. And so, yeah, the only thing I have as a critique is that I start to wonder if you could be very selective with each of those cores and have those cores start to access, particularly in section, different levels of the program. So like the level that you might enter the, I guess it's a radio station. You said like an office might be very different the level that you might enter for the hotel. So just in terms of its vertical section. So that's not so much a critique as it's, I think, the thing I would start to look at in the next step. And there's a kind of evenness to all the pieces too, right? I mean, they're all kind of about the same scale. And just to me, I'm suspicious about it, but I don't know. But given the different types of programs you have, it seems to me that there's a little bit of an evenness. I actually think it shows quite a bit of facility, and I actually really enjoy the section. So, like I said, it's not so much a critique as it is an observation.
Yeah, Keith, I mean, oh, sorry, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that might be the problem, right? Is that it's difficult to give a critique on something that is so opaque in a sense, right? You're not really allowing us to make a connection between the kind of the operations that you're making, let's just say formally, the relationships of, the forces that are acting on your site and the things that you've decided to pick as either input or seed that begin to create kind of a systematic approach to, the things that you're dealing with. And so formally, it looks like something, but you're not exposing the relations or the things that you've operated on that created that final version of things, right? So as a formal diagram, for us, it's very difficult to decipher. And if you were an artist making a sculpture, you could say, that's it, I'm done. You understand or you don't understand it, that's not my problem potentially, right? But as a student architect, we want to understand, and that we want to make sure that you understand, the procedure, a process that you've established yourself and how you generate form in this particular condition. And in relation to the broader idea of programs, right? Because they're asking you for a very specific program, very specific functions of this building or this construct. You have to give us some ideas of what that relationship is as well, right? And even though the final form may be interesting, there's a fragmentation happening. As the previous reviewer mentioned, there's this interesting maybe potential idea about these nodes that are kind of concentrating some vertical kind of translation or circulation. There are moments here of things that are interesting, but in terms of bringing all of that together in a comprehensible mixture, and also giving us kind of a story behind how you get there and how does that, kind of culminates into a piece of architecture that functions, is very difficult for me to kind of to see. And even your sections and your elevations, they're shying away from being a building. You're using architectural language in a sense that you're using Porsche line types, potentially, I don't know if there's levels and things like that. So using architectural language, but what you're showcasing is a very generic articulated form that is hard to connect back to all these different pieces. So that would be my general comment on this, is that there are moments and there are things that are emerging here that could be very interesting, but you're giving us no insight in how these things came to be. And it's very difficult then to kind of give you a constructive advice or have a discussion about exactly how these things operate. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, perhaps continuing a little bit, or building a little bit on Kerence's point. I think one of the drawing, Keith, that you produced that it's really that could be really helpful for your presentation is this in your board. I think this is your ground floor plan, like here on the bottom right of your Live from Eco Park board. Where we start seeing a little bit the way that you begin to posture your proposal in relationship to sort of the primary axis of Sunset Boulevard and Eco Park. And it's maybe the way that I start reading it is sort of a very clear logic by which you want to create some sort of proto-continuous edge, both in relationship to Sunset Boulevard and to Eco Park Avenue, some sort of front that creates some sort of continuity while maintaining this sort of the prompt of the in-betweenness or the in-between porosity that sort of allows sort of informal sort of strategies of movement into the block. And then once you pass this sort of first layer, we are able to sort of notice this much wider and broader kind of organizational system that opens up so many different opportunities in terms of like programmatic occupation and ways of sort of using this interior of a courtyard of sorts, which I think is really beautifully sort of highlighted in your sections, right? When we start seeing the possibilities of passing this initial block, this initial threshold, and then we can see sort of the expansion of this interior sort of volumetric strategy. And so if the studio, besides the programmatic and sort of side logics, was asking you to think through the logic of the in-between, I think you've done really, there is the sort of a seed of a really interesting proposition where you're multiplying the in-between logic. There is the in-between of the entire block. There is the in-between of each of these individual kind of elements. And then I also really like the way that, again, going back to your, to this sort of ground floor plan of sorts, I like the way that you're able in some of the, in some instances, to create sort of continuities between these individual blocks through these sort of axes or these sort of figures that maybe are legible as sort of like an absence connecting these two larger volumes, for example. So you're able to create this sort of in-between connection by, not by virtue of sort of adding more and more stuff to your composition, but rather creating sort of this gaps that in a way reconnect these masses. And so all of this, I think, is very promising, but I do agree with the comments that were made until now that once all of this interface is sort of constructed for yourself, I think being able to go in and articulate the potential of all of this organization, I think is really paramount, is really important, because otherwise, you know, I'm dreaming to have you describe how sort of this retail market, for example, this is just a silly sort of point, but how the sort of retail market begins to be broken apart and produce this sort of movement between interior, exterior, and then sort of feed into the transient hotel lobby. I mean, this is a beautiful programmatic sequence that I would love for you to sort of being able to sort of investigate. I think it has been brought up the idea that this is sort of like create sort of these generic ideas of a poché, of an edge. Everything is gray. And of course, it's sort of in the process of being developed, but I would love for you to think about like which one of these walls are really thick and massive and completely blocking an edge versus creating a much more continuous and fluid relationship with the rest of your intervention. And sorry, I'm going to say one last thing. I think you haven't spoken at all about all of these drawings here to the bottom right, but I think that you clearly have developed in this initial studies, I think, some sort of very interesting language in terms of materialities, in terms of porosity, in terms of ways in which the seams and gaps can sort of create this sort of graphic that sort of continues and characterizes specific logics between the ground, between the different figures. And I think that the next step for you, if you had time to continue working on this project, would be to sort of redeploy some of these specific qualities back into your generic massing, which is where I think your project lies at the moment. But thank you for the work.
If I was going to jump in here, which I guess I get to, what's interesting is that you were just referring to his mid-review boards, which was in April. And there's something about the way in which those were represented and developed that suggests something in the way in which you spend your time or the way in which you focused on redrawing or rethinking maybe didn't help or didn't advance your project. Because I look at the radio station and already back then it was a far more developed building in terms of even the way in which it presented itself than what I'm having a hard time finding now. You know, even the way in which you gave it maybe a touch of structure, or you gave it a signage. Even the idea of putting signage on it had an argument that I don't know if that's still there. It's hard to tell from those elevations. It's almost like you spent a lot of time developing a Rhino model, but didn't deliver the logics of outside of it. I mean, actually, I like your ground plans. So, I mean, I think your plans kind of are your strength of delivery of conversation. But these were stronger. Even the way in which you showed your elevations were stronger back at mid-review. It looked like a clear project. So it makes me wonder, it just brings up some sort of thoughts and questions on what preoccupied your time as you developed. I mean, your plans looked like they are developing. It may be because it got too idiosyncratic or too difficult to manage at the strange scales of the shapes, but yet in section, you're quite good at managing those, because I actually think you have a strong project. No, Daniele, no excuse. I mean, it's fantastic that you pointed to what is strong in our memories. I'll remember this project always from these boards. I may not remember other than the ones that William drew our attention to, which is the diagrams at the beginning. They get a little muddy when you put the gray, almost like translucent gray fields of, I'm not sure what those are, but they kind of stop us from being able to read the clarity of the way in which you're representing. So those are things I would just kind of remind yourself, because I know from other projects I've seen you do in the past, you have a great talent and facility.
Can I add something to this? Because I think
Please.
it just reminds me of something. Maybe like it seems that a strength of yours is this initial exploration of form and the complexities that it may be generated, or the emerging conditions that are happening with all these things coming together, right? But technically you're creating something quite complex, and you know, we in the practice of architecture, we spend months and months and months trying to resolve these complexities, right? That's what we do. And so I think it's not unusual to have students kind of struggle because it gets so difficult to do. And it might be that if your strength is this initial kind of that more diagrammatic and more sculptural operational kind of, you know, work where you bring all these pieces is your strength, maybe pushing the project in the way that you do, because that's what's expected in the class, right? Like this kind of boards with the overall plan, might be to say, to really stay within the confine of these types of studies. And instead of presenting a full project globally at the same level for everything, to actually pick spaces and moments where these relationships are at their most either dynamic or interesting or extreme, and how they relate to a specific program, and really then focus on that moment and develop that to the level of the drawings that are required in the class. That might be a way to kind of propose a broad kind of approach to this and how you're gonna do that. But then in the end, instead of kind of bringing everything, which is in your case probably an impossible task in such a short amount of time, to kind of say, here's the radio station, for example, or something, like choose a space or a couple of space or moments in your building that you would want to develop, and show how these relationships kind of develop and translate into architectural kind of constructs and plans and sections and program circulation. That might be a way to kind of focus the work a little bit to get a better result out of it.
That was very helpful. Maybe we can move to the next student. Keith, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I will share my screen. Hi everyone, my name is Yuri, and I'm going to introduce you my mid-rise project. Echo Park is a pretty diverse community, and the site occupies an entire blocks of Montana Street and the Echo Park Avenue. And my initial design thinking was to elevate or cantilever the building up in order to free up the grounds for some other purpose, such as the green area and the people getting in and out easily, and then to become more welcoming to the community. The gray color is the accessible path and the sunken courtyard in between. Most of the programs start to happen on the second floor. Programs are more like addressing and responding to the site conditions, such as the daycare, because of the schools and the institute happens in here. So I was thinking, and this area is kind of like quiet. So I was thinking to have the community spaces located in here, and then the mixed types of housing and office complex will be located on the Echo Park Avenue because of the business happens in here. And the intersection showing the my ideas of cantilever the building and then more accessible on the ground level. And then try to maintain the idea of cantilevering in some part of the building. And then in the chart model showing the loft housings were cantilever up, and then some retails and coffee shops are on the ground level. In between is the masonry garden space. And then I'm using the wooden street facade on the housings to differentiate with the office. And then the attempts of using the wooden street facade. And last but not least, in the section showing how my cantilever idea and some of the spaces happened under in between and under on the ground level. And that would be it. Thank you so much.
So on your big renderings, you're showing a wooden facade, the one that shows the corner of the street on your board. But that one doesn't have holes in it. And is it residential as well?
Yeah, it's residential.
Okay, but it doesn't have the cutout that you're showing on your chunk models or things like that.
Yeah.
Is it a different strategy, or is it, or what's the?
Because I did it in the last minute, so.
Okay.
On that rendering, so the cantilevered space that you're talking about, I mean, there's a few of them. In this rendering of the big rendering, so is that one of the spaces that you're getting the cantilever, and then
Yeah.
I assume you're also, at least in this section, looks like you're going down some as well. So it's both stepping down into the ground, and you're getting some cantilevering over the top.
Mhm.
I wonder if there's enough. I actually really kind of like setting up those moments. I'm wondering if it's not a little crowded though. I mean, there's something, sometimes there can be so much going on that nothing's going on. And I think that could be a really special moment. It's actually kind of an odd moment on a corner like that. I mean, odd in a good way. And, but I think it needs a little bit more room to breathe, if that makes sense. It feels like it's a little impacted by other parts of the program. But there is something kind of interesting about the scale of the project, and I really do appreciate the kinds of changes in texture. And my dog does as well. I'll stop down so I can.
I agree with William. I think when everything is operating at 100% everywhere, you lose a little bit of the special, as he said, moments, right? It's hard to just visually to be able to kind of focus on something. So I think you have a good handle on your language in terms of what you're trying to do, how you're documenting it shows that you understand what the relationship between your plans and your elevations and your section are pretty well. So I think it might just be a moment where you kind of breathe and kind of take a step back and say, okay, where are the highs, where are the lows? Bring a hierarchy in the way that things operate, right? So that you can start to really push certain things. And I think partially for me is the kind of the disconnect between this wooden facade and the white building behind it. And again, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying that there's something here that, that doesn't feel completely right in the way that they interact with each other. I would say the second thing that I feel is disruptive and potentially doesn't help is that all your fenestrations are happening at the same scale everywhere, right? Which again takes you away, like it just like normalizes the whole thing instead of allowing you to use potentially the programs to emphasize or separate or make something special, right? So I think you could totally, again, that's outside maybe of the actual massing, but those are maybe more kind of subtle things that you can do with everything else. The idea of the cantilever is a great idea. I just think, again, because everything happens at the same time, at the same level, it's hard to kind of pick out, right? What I think is also one last thing, what's super interesting that you're probably super timid about it in your section. I really, really like when you're starting to carve the ground, right? And where you're starting to actually delaminate this building a little bit from like a ground condition that might be what relates back also to the rest of the community, right? In the sense that you're kind of filtering the urban level, which is human scale at the ground level. And it's starting to kind of it has the really great potential of starting to filter, not that it's accessible for everyone necessarily, although you have public spaces in here. And it would be interesting to see how you could start to create a network, like a more global approach to these carvings, how they connect to each other, how they interact with outside the site, inside the site, and how they kind of programmatically function. I think that's almost like as I said, a very timid approach that you have here, but with the cantilevers and the kind of articulation of your building that create these pockets of exterior spaces, let's just call them, I think there's a huge potential here of like pushing that forward.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Rui, I think this is, it's really a great project, and I really appreciate the work and the way that you described your proposal. Like it has been said, I think you have a very clear handle over sort of the organization of the different elements on the block. I think the way that you very skillfully work between these two figures, like the idea of the linear block or the linear element and the sort of more punctual circular units. So like a line and a point, not to become too simplistic of this. I think it's really, really exciting to see how in the massing and in your plans, you're able to sort of shift and make these two kind of formal proposition or organizational strategies with their sort of affordances, right? So the idea of the circular array as a way of sort of producing sort of a moment of primary of a hierarchy, like a center, let's say, versus the linear element that maybe describes more ideas of circulation and movement across the sites, producing these sort of facades that sort of produce very strong actual organization. I think it's really beautiful, the fact that the two figures, the two strategies ultimately work really tightly, and you have a hard time sort of separating them completely. And in that sense, I think maybe that's the way that I see your sort of take on the logic of the in-between of the project. And I wonder, like, if I tried sort of zooming into your sort of programmatic distribution, because I think what you do really well from a formal and sort of overall overarching sort of massing strategy, I think in terms of programmatic opportunities, you maybe fall a little bit short on that aspect, because you zoom in and I mean, circulation flows beautifully and all, but the program, the way that you sort of so strongly sort of separate nodes, I think that maybe could be problematized a little bit. The fact that the boutique hotel and the transient hotel, the fact that the small scale apartment and the larger scale unit, the public and the private, like it's all very sort of like it's divided sort of in very clear sectors. When instead, I think when you look at your plans, you see how you could sort of produce a very beautiful sort of redrawing of this, where sort of this linear paths of circulation could allow you, the sort of linear and circular paths of circulation that you constructed on your overall proposal could allow you to sort of interweave a little bit more strategically these different kind of areas. Not that, you know, I'm not trying to suggest that everything is mixed with everything else, because that's kind of like an antithesis of I'm not a huge supporter of that kind of approach, but at the same time, I think you're within your emphasis, you're still very rigid on these different elements. And I wonder if you sort of recognize that a little bit, or if it's something that you can see pushing forward, or if it didn't come up at all.
I'm not sure he wants to answer your question or understood that. I have something I kind of want to point to you. If everyone, I don't know if you can get to his mid-review board, it's up in the upper right area. There are these pink axonometrics and a section, and also some really interesting diagrammatic plan strategies. And for me, there's something that shifted, which I don't think shifted for the better. And I think it had to do when you started developing the housing area, you took that into the commercial area, which used to be these large round almost like mini apples, you know? And they had a relationship to the corners in an interesting way, and set up a sort of very fundamentally different approach to the institutional property on the two corner ends that shows up also very strongly in the section, right? Are you guys with me, kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you see somehow, and I think, you know, your development skills are amazing. You know, your wall section is beautiful. All the detailing in your access really well worked out. Very impressive. You've made it through all this elements. But then when you come to the corner condition elements, and I look back at those featured items, they've dissipated into this blur of, I think Carenza hit it, like all the windows are the same size. You wouldn't know that that's the office versus the housing anymore. You might as well put the wood sticks on it there too. You know, it's somehow within the formal logic of it. It's still, there's a reference in the plan. I can see the plan tried to hold on to some of those characters, but it lost its character. And that really shows up in the AXO. And I'm not really sure where that happened or why, but I just want to point that to you for your future work. It's to me like a forest tree thing, where once you got into the trees, you just really ran with the trees to such a beautiful level. And I think maybe Daniele just mentioned it, that you need to step back, or someone said you need to step back and just kind of look at what happened and what got lost. I think it would make it more powerful if it carried a little bit of that iconic nature in the areas that needed to be or could valued as iconic. And maybe you were scared by their shapes. They look a little frightening in section in terms of their development capacity, you know? They're very upside down circles. How do you occupy that or use it? Are those public spaces? Are those, you know, rain gutters? You know what I mean? I don't know what they are. And maybe there's something that got lost there in fear. I'm not sure, but I think overall your strategies were so clear. Even the diagrams of your strategies were clear, and it just kind of got intensified to the same level, which looks much more like housing than institutional. I mean, I've always loved your project, so I'm just pointing that out.
Well,
Yeah,
Steve, I'm actually curious if to what extent it's because of in terms of the formal operations, the kind of bullion operations, the kind of plasticity of it, carving, filleting the corners, even the round ones. There's always a challenge to go from that to translate it, something which is so carved, and then you have to come back and make this more skeletal thing. So, you know, when I look at the drawing just to the left of the kind of detailed section, right? At that point, it starts to lose its plasticity. And I'm not sure that you could, I mean, there are ways to avoid that, but I think you'd have to find a way to make it almost more of a scrim or screen or something that can kind of hold itself as a form, yet still allow in light and views or more operable pieces. So I think there's a real formal challenge that's not easy to overcome for anyone really, but you know, I think this is really tough because when I look at the mid-review project, I actually think some of those are pretty incredible forms. I just don't know if the translation can be done as easily. You know, even the cantilever loses a little bit because like the space that's created by the cantilever is almost matched by the other space just on the right of it, right? So I'm not really getting as a kind of pure spatial composition. Anyway, I don't think I'm helping in that way, but it's in a useful way. But I do think there's something in the translation from it, something in the kind of plastic bullion operations to the kind of much more skeletal framing thing, which has been really hard to get to.
If I I rarely talk on these reviews, but if I may add something to what William just started. If you go to the second board, the one which is now in the upper corner, upper left corner, the second board. Yes, that one. Can you just zoom on it, please?
This one.
Yes. I mean, there is There is, I mean, for me, the project is a kind of unfinished from what was said, especially for the facades, because you see, you have something very interesting going on there. You have kind of this hybrid tectonics in which half of it you're expressing actually the structural element, you make an architecture out of it, and on the other side you have screen, and somehow they're kind of a blending, and you have different programs on this project. And obviously the criticism here is that the facade are looking very uniform, which I totally agree. I think that exploring this language, which have started, they're like a pure, not just formal language, which there is a lot of them to be explored formally, but also on a practical and functional, on expressive level, what you're covering with this, what are they operable, as William was mentioning. There is a lot to be done there. It's a purely a skin job from here on. And I kind of recommend you, and I don't know how far you're going to go with your project, but is something which you can explore further, at least to develop it, because that is the missed opportunity. These ideas which are starting here to be extended over all the envelope of the facade. Not much to say.
I have one quick comment regarding your chunk model. I think it's so beautifully executed and has so much richness there. I think there's maybe some design solutions to the, I guess, commonality of the punch windows of the elevation. And the way that you've kind of sliced elements of the facade away and revealed what's beyond might have been a strategy that you could have applied to developing these elevations in a much more rich manner. I think it's kind of in the lineage of deconstructivist work, which I think is maybe super nice in terms of taking this drawing and taking some of the logic and design strategies from it and applying it elsewhere. I think that could have been a really nice way to utilize a drawing as something which produces design. It's not always necessarily producing documentation, which could have pushed your project forward a little bit more.
It's a great last comment. Thank you, Joanna. It's very, very, very strong project and a great amount of work, and really appreciated. Hopefully some of this will find their way into your sensibility as you move forward. Around the tectonic structures thing was actually quite interesting too, to see that. All right, thank you. We're gonna move to the next week.
Thank you so much.
We have 3 more to do. So Langdon, you're up.
Hi everyone. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you all see? So my project is titled Axial Dissonance, and it's about an effort to create a rich, veering on chaotic aggregate building form that's kind of grounded in a clear organizational strategy and comprised of relatively normative kit of parts. So looking at these organizational diagrams, it's about a series of dissonant axes that start to dictate placement of program. So the commercial axes are aligned with the city grid and comprise all of the massing and building form on the ground floor. So that comprises restaurant, retail, and office space. And then elevated above that, as you see in number 2 over here, the housing axes are rotated and elevated so that these housing bars kind of sit above the commercial spaces below, creating bridging, and the rotation results in some nodal organization, which then, if you look in the 3rd diagram, plugs and tubes. It results in a series of vertical plugs going all the way through the project that are providing dynamic vertical circulation in between kind of these at the intersections of these different parts. And then 2 horizontal tubes, which aim to provide connectivity across the disparate housing types. And then finally finishing with a process of greening, which is intended to kind of help promote some privacy and more intimate outdoor spaces, and also help to soften the form a little bit, which might otherwise have the project appear rather stark. And so here we can see the site plan and some of these different pieces from those diagrams kind of mapped on with the cyan showing the commercial axes, the red showing the housing axes, and then these kind of actually rather faint circles showing the vertical plugs, and then relative to the site. Moving into the floor plans, here we can start to see the breaking up of the ground plane due to the process of greening and also the addition of some level changes that start to create a more meandering central avenue through the site that serves as, can to some extent serves as a cut through, and then also kind of promotes engagement with people walking through the site. And you can also see here the kind of general site strategy of kind of holding the Sunset Boulevard and Echo Park Avenue corner with a large corner retail spot, and then the Logan Street and Sunset Boulevard corner is kind of opened up to initiate entry into that kind of primary site avenue. Moving up to the second floor plan, you can start to see how the housing bars kind of lay across at this intersecting axial lines to start to create those points of intersection where the vertical plugs start to appear. There's also the appearance of the bridging that's happening as these housing bars kind of span across the mass on the ground plane. As well as the tubes kind of providing connection across these different housing types. And a similar story on the preceding 2 floors. And then moving to the sectional characteristics, again, you can kind of see the vertical circulation plugs that are providing vertical circulation from the parking down, subterranean parking below, all the way up to the elevated housing bars, and the elevated housing bars spanning across these ground commercial masses to kind of open up that ground plane, and then also the tubes piercing through for further circulation opportunities. Moving into the next section, here we can start to see the formation of the housing bars a little bit with they've been kind of split up so that they're each single loaded corridors and then pushed apart to create these crevices, which provide light through all of these circulation spaces and also down into the parking area below a little bit so that is not so dark and dismal. And then these moves also provide some minor pathways below at these kind of open spaces left over by the ground plane masses and the housing bars above. So coming to the elevation oblique studies, these start to show the fenestration and material strategies throughout the project, and also the impact of greening on the site in terms of softening the form and providing some more intimate outdoor spaces. And then moving to Axone, a series of vignettes that start to try and show how these different strategies are actually working in the project. So moving to the first vignette, which takes place at the Boutique Hotel, you can see the kind of glass form from the vertical plug reaching over and down into the split between the two bars making up the Boutique Hotel for this nice kind of circulation atrium-esque moment. And then next we get a view of one of the crevices and these elevated housing bars kind of leaving space for minor pathways along or through the site. And as well as a closer look at the impact of the greening and the materiality. And then finally finishing up at this interior view from a tube, kind of getting a peek at another more intimate outdoor space that resides by the transient hotel. And then I will leave you with a quick little fly through animation of the project that highlights the edge conditions and also the primary avenue through the site. Okay, and that's all I've got for my presentation, and I will share the concept board real quick. Great.
Langdon, thank you for all the work and the great presentation. Project looks great. Can I ask you, do you mind, I mean, you seem to do like a significant effort on sort of naming of the parts of your building or the different kind of procedures. It seems, can you go a little bit more in details on your plugs and tubes?
Sure.
Like in particular the tubes. Can you describe, maybe using one of your plans or one of your section, like a moment or a way in which they sort of they become sort of particularly relevant for your project?
Yeah. So let's see. Let's go to this plan here. I would say the plugs, the vertical circulation is kind of about you know, in the midst of kind of more, I guess, normative housing bars to kind of have some fun moments for some dynamic stairways and interesting form that kind of makes it a really engaging place to be. And a similar idea for the tubes. The tubes originally, I left them large enough so that they could actually be you could have actually potentially 2 levels of circulation in there and could fit some more program such as a gallery space or something, which unfortunately I did not have time to show anywhere. But the idea was that they could kind of provide additional program kind of between the housing, and also provide connection across the disparate housing types that, given the mixed income nature, these people might not otherwise have that access to each other. And also it's intended to, the kind of orientation is intended to provide access to public transit, which is primarily occupied kind of along Echo Park Avenue with several bus stops, and then a few on Sunset Boulevard as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, thank you. Of course, I find the reason why I was asking is because I think that I find between those two elements, I really appreciate the role that your plaques sort of have in sort of mediating the two axes or the multiple axes that you construct on the site. And I like that in particular, there was one of your vignettes that was highlighting the transition of the more solid mass of now I'm not finding it anymore, but sort of in the plan you can see how there's always position at the beginning or at the end, almost if they bookend the intersection of this different axes, and they act as sort of this beautiful element of negotiation that sometimes embeds itself into the heavy mass of one of these bars, and sometimes sort of protrudes outside to produce this sort of different kind of public space of occupation, which I think are really exciting. But I'm not really convinced about this sort of really sculptural, overly sort of like the scale of this sort of tubes of connection seem to be a little bit undermining the overall strategy. And to me, the idea for you to saying this is an additional programming space that can allow the different income housing to be finally connected, I think it's a little bit of a, I don't know, is it necessary that one block is for one type of salary and another block is for another kind of income, and then you need these big tubes to be connected? Could sort of the different typologies of units be a little bit more sort of intermingled in the bar itself to be able to produce this kind of like porosity, programmatic porosity that you're after, without sort of having to add this sort of foreign pipes in between them? That's the part that I'm a little bit confused, especially because the moment that they sort of penetrate the bars, that's the only moment where in your project the interaction that you are designing between these parts seems a little bit passive. I mean, they just intersect with one another, both in terms of facade articulation, in terms of apertures, in terms of like volumetries. That's the only thing that I am a little bit dubious about the project, and I'm curious to hear yours and other people's opinions on this.
Yeah, I was. There's so many things I think are that have been done really well in this project. Mm-hmm. My concern was also the tubes, maybe for a slightly different reason. In the plan, I actually really like the way that they begin to cut through the site and provide that other way of movement. And even from the beginning, as you kind of, show the kind of diagrams of the different kind of axial relationships, even then it seemed that it was important to be able to move through the site in these different ways. I think for me, it's the actual tube itself. It's not what the tube does or its role or even how it intersects, but it's literally the scale and size of it. I think that you could have had those as just a void that went through and a much more subtle kind of line. And I think you would have functionally done the same thing, but I think on a formal level, it might have been a little bit better. And the only other two things that I can even, find that are, the greening part, it's a little bit, well, it's an odd thing because, you're controlling it. You should look at Serlio's 3-stage set proposals. Just, you know, I guess it's SERLIO. And because there's a conversation about the rational and the less rational in the city and rural. Anyway, so you should take a look at that, because I think in some ways it would be more about how that it's more like breathing, right? It should be something that kind of grows, contracts, expands, contracts, as opposed to kind of being dotted. This to me feels a little bit more like measles or something.
Okay.
So, you know that, and then the last is just those windows with the kind of, you actually have done a really good job, because when I was talking about before about the idea, how do you take something and kind of bullion operations, this formal thing, this plastic thing, how do you get it with the skeletal? One of the things I really like about what you've done is you've actually made the glass formal, right? It's plastic, it has form, it has shape. And I think you've done a really amazing job on that. And you were also trying to make it distinct, though, from the other kind of material properties, saying, well, this is actually something that's thick, it's carved out, you know, I'm punching a window in it. It's the actual punch, that particular punch, that I'm not as big a fan. I think it's a great project.
Thank you. I guess to counter that point in terms of the window openings, I've definitely gotten some mixed feedback on those. I guess overall the thinking was, in a lot of places they're kind of spanning across units or across floors to kind of disrupt the reading of the size of units from the exterior. And then also generally just in addition to the greening, kind of another attempt to soften the form a little bit so that it's not so stark and imposing.
I'm not sure what's wrong with stark and imposing.
Also fair.
Also greening. I mean, it sounds so much like greenwashing. I mean, is it? I think there are different ways in which you can do this. I mean, I love the way that like your the base volume, the one that is sort of the commercial, sort of seems to sort of become one consistent element with the grounds, almost if you're thickening the infrastructure of the ground, and it disappears into that layer. And I think that if you start thinking in that sense, the greening or the kind of like relationship with sort of like a softer ground, a softer relationship of ground, it doesn't necessarily have to result in this kind of like linear patches of green, you know, like a triangular place for palm trees. I think it can be a much more kind of a much thicker understanding of what that mass does for you, right? It reads as something that you add in the end on top of a volume, rather than as a reading of the whole ground condition.
Yeah, I kind of agree. What I appreciate about this project, although I don't like the look of it much, is that it is aggressive, and the moves that you're making are rough and not necessarily sophisticated in the sense that like intently, right? It's just like, it just rams through it. And the fact that you're, you know, the types of drawing that you're showing, the types of views that you're showing, the axonometrics, which make it flatten everything, right? So make everything even more rigid and tough and everything. I think it's a provocative language, let's just say. And I do think it has its limitation in its problematics, but I think it's interesting. It's always interesting to have a student who has, you know, who just puts it out there, and it cannot be neutral, right? You have to have it demands a reaction. So I think right there, you already have an interesting kind of proposal here. What I think is at issue potentially, again, is this relationship between materials, forms, and how the language kind of speaks to how they speak to each other, right? All these pieces. And again, a relationship doesn't necessarily mean that they fuse or combine. It could be a relationship where they oppose and differentiate, right? So I think potentially a run through the whole language is to kind of a tonality in terms of how much you're pushing, how much you're emphasizing or minimizing, and then looking at again, the conversation was about this tube and how it intersects with the building. Well, that intersection is a moment that you need to resolve. It's an operation. on your form, and how does that translate at different scales on different conditions would be one of the things that I would point out. It is true that these windows have the same, have the same problem with it, and it potentially is because it seems like a foreign language that has been plastered on, and it seems a little bit disconnected. Now, again, disconnection is not necessarily a bad thing, but I think in this particular case, it doesn't quite work globally. But what I appreciate also with this project is, and I know we're these days we're getting into immersives, which has kind of questioned a little bit how we communicate about architecture, how we experience architecture potentially in digital spaces, and how we as architects have to kind of somewhat refine the way that we explore and explain spaces. And I appreciate the fact that even though this project is massive at a large scale, you are also then pinpointing these human scale moments that are, you're kind of showing the big picture, but then you're also coming inside in here at the edge, in the human scale. And I think that completely, that brings a whole other kind of condition in this, in how we understand the composition that you have. So I think everybody should do that. You need to constantly go back and forth between the scales and look at it, at the bathroom stall level. At the same time, look at it at the kind of larger composition. I think it's important because it gives you that three-dimensionality and in a sense of our understanding of what these things are. And I'm not a fan of the overall composition necessarily, but I do think that you have an edge condition on your site, the perimeter of your site, where there's kind of fragmentation or a retreat from the boundary, which I think creates a new condition that not many other projects have shown us so far, where you are potentially a little bit more open and more porous in terms of how you deal with the buildings and the neighborhoods that are across the street on all sides. So even though it feels very busy, very aggressive, I think there are some boundary condition, edge conditions that are worth exploring, because it seems to be kind of created a new condition that is not apparent in your global plans, for example.
Everybody. So Langdon, that's very accomplished, and I appreciate your stylistic interests, which I think, as Kerensa pointed out, are maybe not the contemporary stream these days that most people would go with. There's certainly not enough pink on the drawing. In some ways, I think I'm just being honest. I think your holdback and interest is very provocative, and the way in which it got this still a little dystopic, but there's something interesting about the greenery. And I really like number 16, I think, is where I'm most convinced by your project. It's a little Erico and Moss. There's something very exciting about what you're still doing. It seems miscited for Echo Park. It probably would be the most amazing project right by the Arts District or further out in that direction. Seems more appropriate to the nature of that physical landscape, even the way in which you've created sort of these weird regularized buildings with those windows no one likes, but they're kind of like, because they recall that clashing up against these other almost, Rem Koolhausian Chicago weird things that are happening as well with the tubes. So, hey, fantastic. I think the way you drew it, the way you developed it, the way you landed it, I think the comments were right on, all the way to the way the housing was probably overly distributed by type. They're all good commentary, and I really appreciate how you were able to far exceed, I guess, where you started. So congrats.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the feedback. Very helpful.
Joanna probably had something she wanted to add, but we should run to the last two. We have Charlie. Are you with us, Charlie? Yeah, there we go. Something's happening. Costa is here. We could jump to you and then come back to Charlie.
Sure. Yeah,
We can do that.
Share.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Hello. My project, it's called In Space. It's you already know the introduction of what our project is. In Echo Park. So I wanted to start off with the precedents I have from like Schindler House. I wanted to take the idea of how Schindler wanted to have some social space by introducing a courtyard, and that idea that you can have a in between space to engage social interaction. And my other idea comes from my formal idea comes from my the formal project that we did before last quarter. And this one's like a tori with a central, like a court kind of a form. And I took these two ideas and came up with a project eventually. So as you can see, this project, it's a very windy, snake-like path that leads to the buildings that has these programs of housing, hotel, office space, and public market. And as you can see from these floor plan diagrams of basement level and first level, how it leads to the buildings. And of course, there's lots of programs here, and each program has its own. We had to develop it separately, and this is a section of the public market and the office space that cuts right through here. And it shows the sunken space that these windy paths leads to, and then from there the public can access the market. And then of course you might have noticed that the public market and the hotel is right to the southern edge of the site. It's because Echo Park and Sunset Boulevard, these two important streets, they intersect on the southern edge, and so it's a no-brainer that people would circulate more through these paths, and so access to public market and hotel as a position of program to be on the southern part of the site. Going on to the renderings, these windy paths that take you to the housing and also to the sunken space from where you access the public market. This is the public inside space of the inside rendering of the public market. And then coming to the last part, the housing section, where you can see that I took the idea of that the form and married the idea of the we are into this atrium space, and made this below level as the public space of the entire housing, like the entire housing unit. where you have several different housing units like low-income housing and high-income housing. It doesn't matter. It's the housing, low-income housing and high-income housing were all sized like they were specific size that were prescribed to us. So this form was also like allows me to have these variables like spaces in circular forms where I can have either a high income housing, low income housing anywhere in the building. And as you can see at the bottom, like the ground floor, that's where there is a lot of social programs. And the last diagram to show you is just the cross section of the housing building, which is has a GFRC panel, and yeah, that's it. That's all my presentation. I'll go to the concept board, and you can talk about it.
I'm not very clear as to what you got from the Schindler's House precedent reference, right? Because that house is, a two-family house that emphasizes a certain relationship with indoor and outdoor spaces. They're also sharing spaces between the two units, the two family units, right? So there's an idea here. And there's also a relationship to outside landscape. The house is very specific. It's also based on a very specific structure module that Schindler used throughout his career. So there are moments in that house or things in that house that are interesting ideas that could have been extracted. But if all you're extracting is that they have exterior interior space, which is all I heard you talk about, really, to me, it's like, well, it could have been it could have been anything. Then what is it about the Schindler's House that is, like a unique condition that he's setting up in that architecture that you could use and kind of leverage in this kind of contemporary interpretation? This new iteration of the art, your own composition. So I think there would be one question that I have, and for me, it would be the interesting potential here is very much about the program where you're serving different, income communities, let's just say, and they're all inhabiting the same envelope. And what is it about the way you're articulating the different units, how they have to interact with each other, what kind of spaces do they share, and all that stuff. I think seems to be where you're going a little bit, but the solution to that, what you're actually doing, seems to be, again, very soft and not necessarily proposing something that that is compelling and kind of maybe disrupting the system, right? Creating these like silos of circulation in the middle. It's fine, right? But what is it that you are actually trying to do? And I think it's important especially in projects like this, that there's an approach and a clear intent, regardless of what it is. Is it about program? Is it about form? Is it about, proposing a new kind of architectural solution to a problem, an existing problem, or whatever it is? I think for me, all of these things need to be clearly defined and successfully, or do you achieve this successfully or not? That's not even a problem for me. It's just about the process of going through, kind of extracting some kind of concept from either your precedent or something else, and then looking at, the complexities of architectural system, formal and non-formal, and how those things can be articulated around these concepts. And so I think for me here, there's like a little bit of a disconnect globally, and in the form itself, yeah, okay, but it doesn't speak, it doesn't really reconnect back again, I guess, to a broader approach, I would say, in my mind. Do you tend to agree with that? Yeah.
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 So tell me a little bit more even about the public spaces, the courtyard spaces, that's the spaces in between. Yeah, what were you trying to achieve with them?
So for my project, I was trying to make a particular part of the building mostly public, but then also bringing the public nature to the housing buildings where you have people of middle income, high income, or low income house, and a way to bring that that little bit of social nature was into the building with some formal strategy. And of course, you have this entire, like, 50,000 square footage of, office space that you have to do. And also like almost a huge amount of space for public market. So where I had to assign a huge space. So I decided that, I go for entire building where I could house most of the public market. And from there, anyone could access it. If it's like not infused with the housing, then anyone can access it. Where if it's infused with the housing, then people outside of the block may feel like they're maybe invading someone else's space, So that's how I went about with the public project.
Can you go to your section? I mean,
Which
yeah.
one? Which one do you want?
One of the earlier, yeah, that right there.
Yeah, okay.
Because because when you say that, at least what I hear when you say that, it seemed to me like the potential for that is really about this thing here. I mean, it's the shape of that, the ability to both bring people into it, underneath it, and move through it. And it's where this closes it off. I mean, just if I were just thinking about it as a diagram, I might have started to think about these things more in this way. I don't seem to have a very thick line here right now, but that it would allow you to be both kind of moments where you're both inside and outside it, just kind of conceptually. And if you back out and go back to the kind of more modeled section, the Rhino model section. Yeah. So there, where I see that potential is really when you start to do this kind of thing here. And I almost wish that I could have lifted up this pieces here. Anyway, so sometimes I see something, I find it, and I actually want to just start interrogating the thing itself, and play with it some. And even to let go maybe anything I've said to myself about it before, but there seemed to be like some like missed opportunity, like you're close to a couple of things, but it's like you wouldn't allow yourself to break your own rules. And I just think you could be close to something. I don't know what, like the GFE, I don't know how the skin works at all. And I have a suspicion that you're seeing it as something that's much more enclosed or locked than you should. I think it should probably be much more porous. That's my suspicion.
Yeah, the envelope doesn't allow you to establish that relationship with the exterior. It's too well defined and too opaque in a sense, like literally. That there's, I agree. Yeah.
No, I think it's a great series of comments, and I love the comment about like how to deal with this threshold or sort of movement between interior and exterior, whether it's about circulation from the sort of public plaza into the sort of underbelly, or at a larger scale, like within your attitude towards the whole block, Kaustub. I think I find telling, let's say, that when I look at your larger sort of inside aerial view, that, you know, it seems like the only moments where you're able to interrupt this kind of formal exploration that you developed throughout the course, sort of like this soft curving and sort of swelling of these figures through sort of a clear cut lines. It's only at the edges of the site, right? The only moment where you're able to sort of negotiate this threshold between a linear element and this extended curvatures is at that edge, right? The given building plot. And I think that following some of the comments, I wonder if there is a way in which you can start sort of negotiating these two conditions also within the overall organization of your building, or in between each of the parts, or in between the kind of public elements of circulation and the private spaces of the inhabitation. I think in your latest section, I think it's very telling that you have sort of these two large sort of volumetric figures that still borrow from the soft kind of figures of circulation, and then all of your housing sort of occurs in the center with this sort of like very rigid subdivision of spaces. And I love these moments where the two kind of butt head with one another, like this central moment where my bedroom is some sort of all of a sudden has to engage with this belly pushing in. And I think that moment of transition between the two characteristics, between the two, a more rigid, more sort of linear, a stable kind of ground or stable kind of organization, needs to give away or needs to engage with this other entity, with this other figure. I think all of those are really rich moments that I think you can definitely keep in mind as a way of pushing forward in your project, because there is a lot of potential in that moment. It becomes a little bit less successful, in my opinion, when you look at your top view and you look at the intersection with the Northern Street, which now I don't remember. I think it's Logan.
Yeah.
It produces like a radical sort of barrier between the interior that you want to create, sort of that you've been talking about as a public space of continuity with the space of the city, and instead it's literally like two levels down, like producing an edge and a completely insurmountable edge between the two sides. So this act of mediation between these characteristics, I think it's really important, and I hope that you can keep it with you moving forward in your design.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I'm not sure Charlie's going to make it, so we might be ending early. If there's any last words from all of you, appreciated your time and actually very considered, thoughtful and very generous commentary from the critics for some of the projects. Obviously all of them were, it's been uneven here.
No, I mean, I think the work was impressive. That's a lot of program.
Yeah.
I know that you said you usually do over 1 million, but it's still a lot of program on that site. I mean, it's just even as like an urban design problem, it's quite the challenge. And there's all the kind of formal operations that are, these things are just very difficult to resolve. So on the last project I'm thinking about, Anish Kapoor's CloudGate, AKA the Bean in Chicago. And I'm thinking more about, well, what's interesting is that finding a way to actually bring it back down to the ground. I mean, these are just tough formal formal problem. And you have to kind of like, what is the precedence with, and in your project, would it have been easier to actually see those volumes being fairly monolithic, but maybe the ground was changing around them, right? And that's what I'm saying, like you have to kind of take some of these opportunities and just let it go wherever it goes. And I think it just as a general comment, that's, what I would say. Just, you have to kind of interrogate your own work and figure out like, hey, what would this be good for? Because the reality is everything is the right solution to some question, right? I mean, anything you do. So even if you're working backwards, you can kind of say, okay, this is a great space for this. Maybe it's not what you intended, but it might be a great space for something else. That's my 2 cents.
I guess if I was going to say something to Kastab, I appreciated that your mid-review was very different actually. And I think you went to try to take on the struggle of keeping or trying to find something in Jadesboro, as you call it, to transform. And the one building you did choose to pick, it's housing and there are no operable windows. So there's something a little funny about that. There's something valued and appreciated in that effort. And I'm with William's comment that the ground probably could have managed much more of the complexity, because we can do that in ground, and building maybe like your other buildings are a little bit more tempered. It's kind of, there are 4 different buildings on the site. So there's sort of a weird disconnect on that one too, but there's something fun about it. So I appreciated that effort.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Well, thank you, William, Carenza, Daniele. Have a great, we have 2 more reviews, sets of reviews, but for you guys go enjoy your weekend is about to happen, right?
Yep. And you guys don't have cicadas there.
Oh no, cicadas are frightening, aren't they? They're so fun.
Once in 7 years, and outside my window, it is over 90 decibels.
Yeah, I'm living in New Jersey as a kid with Cicada Land. It's so intense. Kind of fun though, isn't it? Super loud. So they must have shedded all their bodies too now, right? So there's these weird carcasses all over everything too. Such a wild thing.
It's just
fun.
Something I don't, back to California to not have to go through this again. All right.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having me.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Yeah.